Do you want a financially secure future, not just for yourself, but for your loved ones as well? This is Generations of Wealth, the podcast that breaks down the most effective wealth building strategies you can easily apply to your own life. Join investor and international best-selling author Derek Dombeck in exploring practical tips and sound advice on building a profitable business, creating a powerful brand, or getting into the thriving world of real estate investing. This is your chance to create your very own financial roadmap to live your vision, love your life. Let's begin this discussion with your host, Derek Dombeck.
Welcome to the Generations of Wealth podcast. I am your host, Derek Dombeck, and today, a friend of mine that I have not been able to see in person in a few years, but one of the leading guys when it comes to media and just getting yourself out there, whether you're a mom and pop or you're a big corporation, you got to have a social media presence. You got to have content going out there. So Josh Culler will be with us in a moment. Before I bring Josh on, I really, again, as always, want to tell you how much I appreciate you following the Generations of Wealth show. Help us any way you can to spread the news, get the show out in front of other people you think that really could, get what you're getting out of this. And, anything that you can do or have questions on, always reach out to us at thegenerationsofwealth.com. And you can see what we have going on with the Elite Negotiations Academy or our Generations of Wealth Voyage, our Circle of Trust Masterminds. All that stuff can always be found at thegenerationsofwealth.com. So with no further ado, let me bring on Josh Culler. And here he is, the infamous Josh Culler. We haven't seen each other in a little while in person, Josh, but I do believe we've had some adult beverages together in the past. How are you doing, sir?
We definitely have some good stories. Even like the 5 minutes we chit-chatted before this, we had some good stories. So it's good to see you.
Absolutely. And for the rest of the world that doesn't know you, give us a little background on who Josh is.
Yeah, so I'll make it short and sweet for you guys. If you want to dig deeper into who I am, obviously, I think Derek's going to have some links to like my socials and my podcast, so you can go check those out further. But I've been in the real estate investing space since 2012-ish, somewhere in the middle of 2012. I got hired by a local company to do a lot of stuff, and this is right out of high school. I was literally 19 years old when I entered this industry. Thank God. So I chose not to go to school and just kind of like got into this just as is because a friend of mine, his dad owned a bunch of rentals in our market. So I started working for them, doing a bunch of minor, minuscule things, doing bandit signs, pre-looking properties, Craigslist postings, Facebook Marketplace postings, all kinds of stuff. I worked with them for about 6 months, then went to work with my good buddy, Gary Harper, who now does Sharper Business Solutions, work with some of the top real estate investors in the country in implementing business systems and processes. He was partners with a couple other guys in our market, and we were doing a wholesaling company. And I got hired to basically be their marketing director. Did that for about 6 years. And in that time, I started developing a lot of skills in the marketing world, namely media creation. A lot of what we were doing back then, Derek, which you're familiar with, was building buyers lists. So what we think of as acquisitions today is not what it's not what it was back then. So a lot of what we were doing was podcasts, interviewing guests, people that we were working with, lenders that were working with us, buyers that were working with us, and just really curating that list with a bunch of content, which is kind of where I got my skills in the content creation space. And did that work with them for about 6 years. The company split up. I went with a guy. We had all started a mastermind, ran that mastermind for a little bit of time, continuing the content creation journey, and then always doing this kind of stuff as a side hustle. And then March 2019, went full-time into my business and started working with people managing their social media, podcasts, YouTube, video content, all that kind of stuff, building their brands, all on the organic side. So even to this day, I only work with people in the real estate investing space. However, what I do and what I teach, you'll find me on YouTube and some of my podcasts and stuff. It's all very, centered to content creation as a standpoint, not just for real estate investors. I just work with real estate investors, but the principles of what I do kind of stay the same no matter what industry you're in. So it's a little bit about me.
Well, I know a lot of stuff about you, and I won't tell the public most of it. But what I do know is you starting off the way you did, and just the grassroots efforts to grow. Where we would cross paths, we're at some of the most elite platforms for people in our space, and you've always been spoken very highly of, which either means you buy them a lot of beverages or you actually know your shit. And and I know for a fact it's the second, because he's way too cheap to buy beverages.
I am, yes. And I go back to my hotel room as soon as the like last session of any event is done, because I'm white.
Yeah, for sure. But let's kind of go to the person who is just a mom and pop, just getting started, flipping some houses, has some rentals. What's the importance of them building their content? Because most of them think, I don't need to have a presence. And I'll put my hand up and say I was that person for a long time.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Whenever I start off with advice towards anybody, not just somebody that because I get that question, Derek, about somebody that's already started stuff. Like, how do I tweak it to make sure it's more specific to my demographic? Ultimately, the whole general premise of social media is to be centered as marketing. I think a lot of people try to take social media, they try to take, even if they start a podcast or a YouTube channel, even if they wrote a book, any type of content that has some sort of value perceived in it, they try to detach it for some reason from marketing. I've seen this done time and time again, endless times, where somebody will start a podcast. I'll say, why do they'll come to me and say, like, how do I grow this podcast? What, how do I monetize it is the popular, thing to ask for. And my first question is always going to be, why did you start it in the first place? And then there's no answer. It's so common and it's unfortunate. So the way that we have to, kind of retool that is everything that we do from a content generation standpoint is based on marketing for our business. And it literally comes down to, if you're a mom and pop and you're just getting going, and I get it. Like, I walk into some of these mastermind groups, Derek, and or even just teaching on somebody's webinar or something like that. And maybe the demographic's a little older, or maybe even just people that are kind of just shut off to like social media as a whole. And they'll start to roll their eyes back and go, oh, here we go, another social media chat. And they're tired of hearing it. But the truth is that it's not as complex and as laid out as like most people think it is. It should just be leveraged as marketing. That's it. I think a lot of people think like, I got to get on TikTok and start doing dancing videos and start doing reactions. And I got to put out like 2 or 3 podcast episodes a week and stuff like that. And a lot of it's the misperception of the commitment to it. Because like, let's be real, like Derek, you just talked about how you're on like 4 straight recordings doing a podcast, and it takes a time commitment to do this kind of stuff. However, if you just boil it down to baby steps, it normally doesn't take all that much to do some consistent content creation. So winding back, if you're a mom and pop, if you're just getting started, or maybe you're a bigger organization, you're not really understanding where to build your foundation, the definition of content marketing to me is answering questions that your target demographic has about who you are, what you do, and your industry. If you can boil it down to just that statement, and all you're doing is flipping a camera on and answering questions, that's literally what it is. And if you're a mom and pop, obviously you may not, if you're in the real estate space, and Derek, I'm not sure entirely your audience and what they're focused in on, but let's just take, for example, if you're a real estate investor and you're flipping houses, like you're probably not doing 20, 30 deals a month. However, you might be doing 1 or 2. Go through the properties, do walkthroughs, record, showing, it's a whole show and tell thing. Like, you could tell people all day long about what you do, but until you show them, they're not truly going to foundationally believe it. Start showing what you do, and that will start to create some sort of generation for your content. Then as you go along, you start to tweak it a little bit, direct it more towards your audiences and that sort of thing. So it's just turning on the camera, showing what you do, answering questions about what your target demographic has about who you are, what you do. And again, Derek, this is where I talk about, like, even if you're a donut shop and you're selling donuts, it's just turning the camera on and talking about the donuts. You're showing people how you make them, showing people how you make the glaze, showing people how you, what kind of dough you use, the batter, like literally showing what you do and then answering questions that people would have about the donuts. It's literally what it comes down to.
Show them how you bribe police officers. Like, that's what you should show them.
Exactly. Sure. Exactly. Case studies.
It's for sure. Donut holes versus the donut itself. I don't know. But I've always had this problem that, when I started this show, right? I was asked the same questions that you just mentioned. Why do I want to have the show? What am I going to do with it? I had a marketing company that I was working with who I don't work with anymore, and their perception was, yes, we're going to build this. We're going to get to a certain following. We'll be able to monetize it through ads and everything else. And I was very resistant to starting a podcast long time. And ultimately now, as I've been doing this for a year, I don't ever want to stop because for me, I know it's not about getting to a certain threshold and being able to sell ad space. I mean, if that ends up happening, so be it. But the relationships and the conversations that I've had with people on this show, people that have listened to this show and then asking me questions, all that type of stuff, that's the reward, right? The network, the people that we get to meet. I interviewed a guy this morning his show will come out, just before yours does. So everybody will know this at that point. But he's 21 years old and he's a second generation in real estate, and he's helping to manage $500 million in real estate assets at 21 years old. It was a fun damn conversation. I would have never had that conversation with this person if I didn't have this platform. And it's such an awesome perspective for other people to be able to see and listen to. And because I asked them, I said, you know what? I have an 18-year-old daughter who's finishing up high school. How do I not push her too hard, but give her enough? Because can you imagine coming into, his world in his teenage years, and then, oh, by the way, son, here you go. You're going to be in charge of whatever he's in charge of, right? It's crazy. But the point is, I do this show because of the satisfaction I get of knowing it's helping people. And I can sit up here on my soapbox and be like, oh yeah, I'm just giving back. I'm giving back. I'm not doing this to give back. I'm doing this because I'm truly passionate about spreading the message about vision and, how we can build generational wealth. But it's also, what do I get out of it? I get the network, and I don't shy away from that. Every person listening to this right now, yourself included, I want to work with you for years to come. You and I haven't seen each other, and I think we figured out probably 3 years, maybe 3.5 years. And yet the second we came on face to face, we were giving each other a hard time. Like, that's the network, right?
Yeah. There's actually a couple points I want to make off of like everything you just said, because it's all like spoken truth. The first thing is I want to go back to the monetization conversation that you had. And here's the thing. People don't understand, Derek, is that any type of marketing that you do, or any kind, let's just say content creation, just organic content creation, because there's a difference between advertising and content creation, right? Because advertising, we could throw out a Facebook ad. We could throw out a postcard direct mail piece, basically pitching and saying like, we can buy your house, cash offer, like no repairs as is, like all that kind of stuff. That's advertising. That's where you could literally get a phone call immediately after that. Whereas content creation is a lot more value driven, and it's a lot more relationship based to build an audience and curate that audience so that they can repeatedly buy from you. So here's the thing. When it comes to monetization, let's say you start a podcast and you're like, you get told like, I need to work towards X, Y, and Z numbers in order to be able to get a sponsorship so that somebody could throw a 30-second mid-roll ad on my podcast to, pay me to basically do my podcast. That's fine. There's many forms of monetization. You could do affiliates. Like affiliates are things you could do like right off the bat. If you have affiliate partners that you work with, like maybe it's a software company or data provider or service provider, whatever it is. But I think the number one thing that people miss out on, Derek, is they miss out on monetizing their own shit. So it's like, if you have a podcast, you probably have something that you could pitch to other people. Whether it's they invest with you because you're looking for a capital and hard money lenders, whether you, like for me, I started a podcast called the REI Marketing Weekly, and I literally get people on there to talk about their marketing. And I'm looking to monetize my services because I only work with real estate investors. So I have a mid-roll ad in the middle of my podcast that basically says, hi, I'm Josh Culler. I edit and manage podcasts. If you have one, make sure to go to this website and fill out this form, and we'll be in contact with you and work with me. So I'm monetizing my own stuff on my own platform that I built. Now, eventually, yeah, it makes sense to start tying in some sponsorships and that sort of thing. But people wait until they hit like 3 or 4 years in and, 500 episodes and X amount of downloads to start sponsorships when they could start on episode 1 and monetize their own stuff and see results the day 1 the episode goes out. So that's something to keep in mind, that I think a lot, and not just podcasts, do that on your YouTube content, do that on your social media content. At the end of every single social media video, you should have some form of a call to action that tells people, basically, if you're this person and you need this, then go here. So if you're, a real estate investor that's looking to start a podcast and you need help with that, then send me a direct message and we can talk. That's literally that's monetizing my content. The next thing I was going to tell you was on the relationship side of things. It's one of the most beautiful things about content creation is the ability to collaborate with other people. For example, right now, the collaboration that's happening between us. When this episode goes out, your team's going to send me over some links and say like, hey, promote it. Like we're recording an episode today, but it just happened today, this morning. I was on somebody else's podcast and I got tagged on Facebook and everything. And they had this like really nice thought out post with a graphic of me on it, being on their podcast. And I shared that out. I never had talked to that person before. But again, like you meant, like when we got on, we hit it off immediately and I built a relationship with that person. I had him on my podcast and likewise, you're going to be on my podcast. The collaboration of it is ingenious, but it's something that like should definitely be invested into heavily in the source of like, when I have my podcast and I'm reaching out to guests to get them on my show, I do one of two things. I'm either reaching out to current existing clients that I work with to deliver more value to them by putting them on my platforms that I've built, or I'm reaching out, to people that I potentially want to work with and get them on my podcast. Now I'm delivering value to them by interviewing them and putting them on my platform for 20, 30 minutes. But I slot it out for an hour because I give 30-ish minutes to chit chat, get to know them a little bit, and potentially be able to talk to them about what I do and that sort of thing. Now, I don't push it and that sort of thing, but I'm building relationship with them. And that has proven to be successful. I've pulled many clients from just having them on my podcast. And then by the end of it, they're like, so tell me a little bit about what you do. And that's normally the way the conversation ends. So those are great points that you brought up. And I wanted to make sure I capitalize on those too.
Absolutely. And essentially you're selling without selling, which is great. And I do the same thing. And the reality is a lot of my listeners, whether they're of this show or they're hear me speak from stage, or we just happen to meet in some other setting, having that social media presence, whether it is a podcast or just your social media itself, I use it all the time to build credibility. And so am I monetizing the Generations of Wealth podcast? No, not directly. But when somebody Googles Derek Dombeck, and I may have approached to buy a property from them, and I tell every civilian I ever talk to about, to buy a property from, I tell them, hey, listen, I got nothing to hide. Go Google me. And that's all I say. That's all I say. And by the time I meet with them in person, they've already built up enough of a rapport with me that isn't with me. They've listened to me. They've seen me. Doesn't matter. That in of itself is worth continuing to do this type of marketing.
I always say that any marketing, like there are some cons to this too, because if you put something out that you don't want out, then that's danger. But for the most part, we should be anyway. But like, if you put something out, whether it's a social media post, a podcast, YouTube video, whatever it is, or you're featured on somebody else's podcast, to me, it's like a 24-hour salesman. So if somebody were to watch a video at 2:00 in the morning when phones are off and everybody's asleep, but they, for whatever reason, like let's say for instance, like the person I work with is on the West Coast, which is 2 hours behind us. So that's midnight for them. They're kind of winding down for bed and they're like, I really needed to start a podcast. Like I really need to reach out to somebody. And then they go, look it up and they come across my content about podcasting and then they watch it at 2 a.m. my time. They're going to be sending me an email or a direct message the next morning. And I didn't even have to curate that lead because my 24-hour salesman content piece was out there for them.
Well, and the beauty of the podcast versus putting a post on Facebook or other social media platforms, this is out there. It's evergreen. And if people can find it, it's there.
Yeah.
You can put a really great post on LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, wherever, and it's down the scroll in a matter of seconds and never to be rejuvenated again. So that's the part that I like about this. But here's my biggest challenge. And Josh, you and I talked years ago about this as I was trying to find people to work with too. And I'm not tech savvy. I mean, I've been forced to learn things that I have to learn. Like I have to be able to not screw up this microphone and this camera and other things like that. But it's not second nature for me to just pick up the phone or a camera and talk into it. Like I like having conversations with people.
Sure.
I get, if I have to do this and talk to myself, it's different and I don't like it as much. But we have to force ourselves to get used to certain things. And then the more you do it, the easier it gets. But that is something that held me back for a long time. And I venture to guess many people you talk to, as well as people listening to this show, they have two things going through their head, right? Like either they have limiting beliefs that anybody wants to even hear anything that they have to say. I've had those many times. Or the second part is they don't want to appear like they're bragging. There is a difference between being arrogant and being confident. If you're good at something and you're not sharing it with the world, shame on you, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But being an arrogant, cocky prick, that I don't want to watch that either, you know?
Yep. Yeah. And I'll tell you this, there's methods to this that I normally run people through. Shockingly enough, a lot of the people that I work with, even though they could be like a maverick visionary type personality, not everybody that has that type of personality. Typically they do, because normally like business owners are good salesmen, so they can speak a little bit smoother and that sort of thing. But
you know my PI, don't you? I am a maverick.
Are you? Yeah, I'm a maverick too. So like, here's the thing is that like, typically it's easy for a lot of people to be able to just hop on to hit record and start talking, right? And theoretically, I always tell people you really shouldn't be talking about things that you're not an expert in inside and out anyway. However, it's still the fact of like, it can be challenging to just look at a phone screen if you've not done it often. And especially if we're going back to the conversation of like somebody like mom and pop that's never done this before, that coupled with not knowing what to talk about are the two biggest roadblocks when it comes to getting started. So here's my tips for this. Number one is if you're, let's start with topics, because normally if we're filling a knowledge / fear gap, topics are going to be kind of the easiest one to tackle. So there's two ways you could do this. Number one, in order to be able to literally create and combine a list of things that you actually are going to talk about, everything obviously needs to be centered around who you are, what you do, your industry, your expertise, that sort of thing. The first thing you do is literally write down every single question that a customer, a lead, a prospect, whatever you want to call them, has about any of those things. That's hard factual data that people are looking out for, that you could create video content on, or a podcast on, or a social media post on, or any video on, right? Or let's say, for instance, you have somebody that's on the phone for you. You should be having them document every single question. And you should do videos on every single question, but not just one video, do multiple videos in multiple different formats. And I think a lot of times, Derek, people get afraid that like, hey, I did a video on this topic like a month ago, so I feel like it's going to be stale. But the reality is that number one, nobody's going to remember that. Number two is if you bring that topic up again, it will create consistency in your messaging, as long as you're not giving the inaccurate information, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. But additionally, you're going to be using different context. You're probably going to tell a different story. You're going to use a different case study. Whatever it is, you're not going to say the same thing twice. It's just not going to happen unless you literally, which I'm against, have word for word a script that you're reading off of. Don't do that. So here's the thing. That's number one. The second thing that can create unlimited video topics for, that I will forever hold true, that you cannot have excuses that you don't have video topics if you use this method. ChatGPT, you're going to open that up and give it a prompt that says, I need 25, 50, 100, 1,000, however many topics you want. I need 50 video topics for social media about my expertise based on the content from this website. Go to your website or your competitors' websites, copy the link to their website, paste it in there, hit enter, and you'll watch ChatGPT do the work and just list you out your topics, right? Then you can do more and more, tweak the topics, whatever you want. Sometimes what I'll even do is I'll say, cool, thanks. Give me 3 bullet points to talk about for each one of those topics. It'll spit it out in a Word document if you want it to. You give it that prompt, that sort of thing. That will eliminate the issue of what to talk about, okay? Now the camera, now we have our topics, we're prepared. What do we do with the camera? So first of all, we're starting simple. You're not going out and building a $20,000 recording studio. You're not going to spend, $300 an hour at a recording studio to record and that sort of thing. You got to start from square one. Anybody that's ever done content at a high level, the Alex Hormozis of the world, the Gary Vaynerchuk's of the world, they started somewhere, and it normally, go back and look at their very first video and it'll prove it. So start with this. You can get a $15, $20, $30, $40 wireless microphone that'll plug into your iPhone. The cameras on these phones are absolutely astonishing nowadays. Whip that open, start recording those video topics. So start there. If you have a hard time with looking directly into the camera and start recording, one thing you could do, that I do this a lot for some of my clients, Derek, is have somebody interview you. So literally, we call this documenting, where you could do it, like I call it either 60-minute style, or you can just look at the camera, have them stand behind you. You could do this, like if I'm looking at somebody here, if you're on video, you're seeing what we're seeing right now, but if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or anywhere, you're missing out. But if I'm looking forward and I'm talking to somebody right here in front of me, just have them ask me the questions, cameras rolling off to the side, and then I'm answering those questions. Or you could have somebody standing behind the camera and then just look at them and answer the questions that way. Eventually, you're going to want to get to the point where you can look directly into the camera. But just like anything in life, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, if you don't do it at all, you're going to suck. But the more you do it, the more consistent you are at it, just get over the fear, then you're going to be good. The last thing I'll say about all of this, Derek, is a little bit of tough love that I'll deliver, because I've now given kind of the blueprint to be able to get through all these hurdles. In business, there's a million things that we have to do, that we don't want to do, that we despise and hate, but we do them anyway because we need to. In 2025, in the world that we're in right now, if you aren't going to create content and put value out for your audiences and your specific demographics, you can bet your ass that somebody that's a competitor of yours is going to do it. And then they're going to have that edge over you in their marketing because you were afraid to do it. So get over the fear, suck it up and do it, and you'll get better at it as you go along.
Yeah. And, the part that I'll actually add to that is I always overthought things, because I had staff that is no longer working for me, and just nitpicking stuff like in my background. And if you're watching the video, and I'll point it out because I don't give a shit, but there's a cord that runs from this TV behind this book. And I had somebody it drove her crazy that you could see that cord. and then lighting wasn't perfect, and this wasn't perfect. And I said, listen, all I want to do is talk to really cool people. Yeah. And I really don't give a shit if I don't have the perfect studio at this point in my career. I want my message to get out, and that's all that matters to me. And we went back and forth for weeks on all this different stuff. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. She doesn't work for me anymore. But I would much rather, because I'm right, she's wrong, whatever. And I pay the bills. But ultimately, this conversation is way more important than, to get out to the world, than if my complexion looks good in this lighting.
Yeah.
Right? Because as you said, there's a vast majority of you listeners right now that can't see us anyways. So you don't even know what I'm really pointing at.
Yeah, and the thing is too, is again, like everybody starts at 0. So you go to 1, then you go to 2. I think the problem that I see especially in our industry, Derek, is that people will see some of the top influencers in our space, and they'll be literally never have shot a video before. And they shoot a couple videos and are like, oh, I need a videographer that's full-time following me around like everywhere I go. And I'm like, you don't need that. You start from ground 0, then work to 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Everybody wants to jump from 1 to 350 right off the bat. And I will say this, like, I'm a person that does value quality. However, if quality is going to be the roadblock for you not doing something, then you're looking at it from a wrong scope. I will say this, just like with anything in life, you want to do it to the best of your ability. You want to make it look and sound as good as you possibly can, because if you're going to invest the time or the money to do it, then make it as good as it possibly can be. But, at some point, Derek decided to put that book in front of the cord and hide the cord, and now it's not going to bother somebody, right? Like there's little tweaks and changes that we make along the way that everybody wants to go from like step number one all the way to like the top level, to where they have a full-time videographer following them around and they have this staff that they're paying $100,000 a year to manage content. And then their business goes to shit and they wonder like, oh, I wonder what happened. And then you ask, like, I've actually had this happen. I asked them like, what do you do with your time? And they say, well, I spend about 25 to 30 hours a week creating content. And I'm like, you mean content about your failing business? Is that what it is? Because that's the issue you're going through right now. So minimize that, work on the business, and let's figure out like actual priorities. So do it to your best of your ability, but you start from one and then you work up as you go along. And I think that's where people get lost along the way a little bit. So
Yeah, and I will also add that I think sometimes done is good enough versus not doing anything at all. And the other thing is consistency. Like we have a weekly show, and I don't think we've ever missed a week. We had one post-production issue. I think we were backed up by 3 days, but the consistency is the key. So if you're going to be putting stuff out just on your own social media platforms, that would be probably my biggest lesson. And not that I'm good at any of this, but I've got a team that makes sure it's all out there.
Sure.
Because if it were up to me, this is what I enjoy. This conversation with you is what I enjoy. Everybody that knows me personally knows that I don't do shit leading up to when I hit record, and I don't do anything after I stop recording, because it's not my area of gifting. But I've got people that it is. Yeah. And that's important to know about yourself. If you know that you're like me, and this is not something that brings you joy other than recording the episodes or recording the content, then find the people like Josh that is their area of gifting. Which, by the way, in order to get in touch with Josh, the generationsofwealth.com/go-to-Josh will connect you so that you can have those conversations, or you can follow his podcast, or you can get in touch. So the generationsofwealth.com/go-to-Josh, it'll be in the show notes. You've heard it here. It's very important. Had to make sure we get that out there. And as Josh pointed out, why am I doing this? Well, I also have my own stuff too. And those that are normal followers know that. And you go to the generationsofwealth.com and you'll find all of that too. So, man, as we kind of wind down here, Josh, I ask this of almost everybody that I interview. What's one question I should have asked you that I didn't? And it does not have to pertain to content creation or social media. It can pertain to anything other than that night we almost got thrown into jail.
Yeah, we won't talk about that one. That'll be a tell-all that'll come out in 5 years. I think that's a good question to ask would be, just from learning from failures. I believe that, like just in detaching from like the social media world and that sort of thing, there's a lot of examples I can give when it comes to content creation, like starting something up and then it ultimately wasn't achieving anything for me, so I shut it down. Stuff like that. I think that being willing to look anything that you have done in the face and learn from it is extremely important. However, it goes the same with relationships. We talked about relationships and the value of that through collaborating and content, but I wouldn't be here today without relationships that I have or have had. And I will tell you this, it's not something I'm like super proud of, but there's relationships that I had when I was younger that I really don't talk to those people much anymore. But they were a contribution piece to who I ultimately have become. And one of the things that I really, really think about a lot, and I'm very intentional about, is like doubling down when I do make a good relationship with somebody, doubling down and trying to bring as much value as I possibly can to that person without making it feel like I'm doing this for something in return. Because we all know those people that like, they're constantly like, I said, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And then they'll ultimately, like, I've had people do, because I'm in the media space, I'll have people reach out to me. Maybe they knew somebody that I knew or whatever. and they'll send me a bunch of edited videos of myself and say like, I'm really trying to get a job and I'm really and to me, it's like, I really appreciate that. And I kind of feel bad, but like, I'm not looking for anything right now. And that's what they jumped to. They had no interest in building a personal relationship with me or anything like that. So I try to lead, and almost everybody that I work with on a personal level with as clientele, I try to have a personal relationship with them first before they work with me. And it's proven that that is the route to go, because sometimes when I've onboarded somebody as a client, they were perceived as this person when I was onboarding them in the talks of working with them. And then ultimately when I started working with them, I saw another side of them that I didn't know about. And ultimately they became like, they were either a jackass, they really wanted to like, their expectations were this, but they wanted to only spend this. So I value relationships so much in business and in personal life that I think it's something I think a lot of people talk about it, but they don't talk about it like in necessarily the ways that I wish I would have heard when I was younger. So that's kind of some of the conversations I would have, is just, value relationships, be intentional about being a friend to somebody and just being kind, and that reciprocates in some way.
100%. And for me, in my world, I've always called it my no policy. So I've raised in excess of $25 million over the years, and I've had to turn down a lot of money from private investors because they would have been a total narcissistic pain in the ass.
Yep.
And it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So even today, when I'm working on a real estate deal and I'm using private capital, it's people I have relationships with, or maybe I'm referred to somebody that might be somebody I'd work with, but that comes from a trusted source, and we're going to build that, that relationship. I'm not going to just jump into bed with somebody just because they've got the short-term capital I might need, but it could be a long-term nightmare, and it's just not worth it. It's not.
Absolutely.
But it's tempting. Absolutely. It's always tempting, right?
It's hard. Especially if I have somebody that comes around, it's like, hey, I want to work with you, Josh. I have X budget. And I'm like, well, that's a good budget. Like, yeah, sure. But I have to be careful with that because same reasons. Like that, if I'm receiving phone calls, and we have protocols, like clients can only reach out to us certain ways, certain times of days. And if somebody breaks that consistently, I have issues with that. And because I get to set boundaries for yourself personally, and it's not shirking responsibilities. It's just prioritizing your life, because I'm building this business for my lifestyle. And because of that, I'm taking it very seriously. So I do value the communication with clients. But if I get a phone call from somebody at 10 o'clock at night and it's about like, hey, you guys put this post out and I don't know if I really like that. Like, okay, well, you could have sent that in the Slack channel. So like, do that next time. Don't call me again. So
well, that's boundaries. That's your vision for your life. That's what this show is all about. And you set your vision, and they're not your avatar or your ideal client for your vision, for your personal life and your vision for your business. You shouldn't want to do business with them. That's not Josh. That's to everybody listening. Yep. That is what this is all about.
And I don't have to press my lifestyle on theirs. However, I can set boundaries for them. And I very rarely ever have those boundaries crossed anymore, because I'm very forthcoming and upfront about it on the front end. So it's on me to communicate that to them, but it's also on me to uphold it as well. Because if I allow them to do that once, it's going to happen again and again. And
snowballs.
Now it's my fault. So.
But I always tell people when they get short with me, how come I'm not available nights or weekends? And I'll be like, well, if I was your bank or your attorney or your accountant, they have office hours. I have office hours. Yeah. And certainly there's special occasions, but those are by appointment only. And you didn't have an appointment. So you want to do business with me? That's the rules. If you don't, I respect that. But you're right. Because I was hard at setting those boundaries until, you and I met certain people that showed us how to figure out how to set those boundaries. But once you do it and it becomes the normal expectation, people don't push it very often.
No, they don't.
It's great. It's great because you get your life back.
Yep. Exactly.
Man, I want to keep talking to you for a long time. But the good news is I get to be on your show, so we get to
That's
keep
right.
talking. And Josh, what's the name of your show?
So we have a podcast called the REI Marketing Weekly. So we only talk about marketing for real estate investors. So if you're an active real estate investor looking to learn how to generate leads, how to build your brand, that sort of thing, interview some of the top real estate investors in the country and in the world, talking about their marketing, and just crack it open, allow them to pull the curtain back and show us what they're doing. So we'll have Derek on that podcast. Maybe by the time this episode goes out, that one will go out. So excited to have you on.
Perfect. Can't wait. Well, again, I appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man.
You bet. So everybody else, again, thanks for coming here. Thanks for following us. Please spread the word, spread the Generations of Wealth message, all the shares, the likes, the loves, all that kind of stuff. Until the next show, live your vision, love your life. See ya.
Thank you for joining us on another insightful episode of Generations of Wealth. May your newfound knowledge help you in leveling up your own strategies to get through the many obstacles to your money-making processes and bring you much closer to the financially secure life you truly deserve. Continue filling up your accounts and further polish your financial tactics by listening to more episodes of the podcast at thegenerationsofwealth.com. Because in your wealth building journey, there is no other way to go but up, giving you the chance to finally live your vision, love your life. That's all for now. See you on the next one.